I really don't know the protocol of Rotary, so if I make mistakes, I apologize. I thought this was a small event. And I enter, I see people, look at Joan. I see people who I haven't seen in a long time. I see very many important people, and I don't know who is who. I see people with big badges with a small golden pins. So I don't know the ranking, so I apologize. Let me just address you as brothers and sisters. I hope that's okay. And people who come together to do good things. So I am very deeply pleased to be among Rotarians who I always see at a distance, and who somehow over the years I am gratified to know that they do great things for nations, for communities, and they do them without a lot of shouting, without a lot of complaining, but they still get things done. And I also recognize that in a special way, this is a special month for you. So when I was coming, I was checking when you started, 1905. In February, which is now 119 years ago, when your founder, Paul Harris, said the journey of what now you are as an organization today. And so for me, it shows the power of an idea. And even more importantly, it shows the power of quality thinking. So I take thinking seriously because I think thinking is profound. Doing is easy, but thinking for every generation requires people who take thinking as an activity, not some sort of passivity, who create time and think through what they are doing. And therefore, Mr. Harris's idea, which was thought through and has been executed very well, has brought together 1.4 million members worldwide, which means that ideas have no color. Ideas have no shelf life, have no tribe, have no religion. And if they are good, they become infectious. And they become, people find some glue in them that binds people into good action. I also like your four-way test. I was just checking these things on the expressway. I apologize. I got held in traffic to get out of the city center. So I read your four-way test. And I thought at some level, I don't mind a debate on these four things, especially the one about truth. And I thought, what do they mean by truth? Is it abstract? Is it based on facts or circumstances? How do they judge their truth, these Rotarians? Or is it a higher and beyond physical and our material world, something that outlasts us, something that defines our purpose? But I thought I shouldn't engage in that debate because I wasn't sure the people I'm going to meet. I hope one day we can discuss that. So your work in education and health and sanitation and environment is also very commendable and a great contribution to our well-being as a world. So from where I stand, a human person or life is a collection of stories. It's a fabric, it's a tapestry of many stories. These stories we find in our homes, we find in our communities. We tell these stories to ourselves. We pass these stories to the next generation. Why do we do this? Because stories give us context and meaning. And if a community doesn't have stories, or a nation that are kept for every generation, that society will be no more. And so it was. I was just trying to remember on 10th of Feb this month, Some two people found me, or they were in the audience when I spoke at a function of a dear friend. His children were getting married, and I was giving them advice as newlyweds. And these two Rotarians approached me and they said, I need to speak today here. I said, how do you know how I speak or what I speak about? You can't just see someone speak in 10 minutes and make a decision that they should come and speak to your event. And so I just wanted to tell you my own story, because stories for me, I find that they are what we leave behind. They are the ones that inspire. That word inspiration comes from the Greek word that means breathing in. You inhale. So when you inhale good stories, sometimes they help you see the world differently. So my own story begins in the year 1856. 1856. My great-grandfather, who was a fellow, his name was Bajuguri. He had been a member of a small clan, one of those small Ankole clans, and his clan had made its way out of present-day Rushenyi. Rushenyi is where the Honorable Kutana, Kawashara, and others come from. They made their way into the hills of present-day Buweju. This is in the 16th century, and they had hardly settled as a clan, and they were attacked by a group of another clan called the Barisa, who originate from Karagwe in northwestern Tanzania. And the Barisa had an alliance with a king called Ndahura of Bunyoro. And the Barisa gave a beautiful lady called Iremera to the king. And they attacked us from the hills of Weju. And we settled down in a place we call today Shema. I don't know if anyone comes from Shema here. And my grandfather specifically lived in a place we call Amahira in Runyachitara. So many homes in one place. And one afternoon, those 10 huts were attacked by another clan. So you need to know this about our country. We have such a young country, raiding for cattle, for women, for all sorts of things. Is 150 years ago. And so they were attacked by another small clan. This clan comes from Rujumbura, the clan of General Mwezi. And they killed everyone. Everyone except two small 10-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy. And these were this now is my grandfather. So the one I spoke about is my great-grandfather. So they are killed, and these boys, this girl and boy survive. And they make a 10-kilometer trip in the night, and they hide in a home of a Munyoro man. So Munyoro was a very strong kingdom. It had that part of Buweju and Shema, some of it as vassal states. So they hid there in the home of an old man, and that old man raises now my grandfather and his sister. I just don't want to bother you with these long stories, but I know that each one of you has a story of that kind. So this old man marries that young girl at 14 and now raises my grandfather. So I have a line of Banyoro relatives in Hoima, in Maogola, from that girl. So you see how our country is connected. Eh? So now, my grandfather now moves to another place we now call Gomba, and he loses everything. And in 1920, he produces my father. And my father, just to not bother you again with long stories, is raised alone, and he loses his father before he was 11. He loses his mother before he was 15. He remains alone. And somehow In 1945, he meets a young lady who had been born out of wedlock, and they make a home together, and they teach themselves how to farm the land, and they become born again, and they say we must dig pit latrine, and they say we must have a balanced diet. They didn't go to school. They learned this in church, writing and reading in church. And by the time I was born, in 1969, our country had 4 clear societies, segments of our society. And if you like history, this should tell you that if you boast that you're powerful or you're rich, I should ask you if your grandfather had a bank account with Grindlay's Bank, then I'll know that perhaps you're part of our upcoming middle class. So by the time I was born in 1969, Uganda had 4 clusters. First cluster, sons of chiefs and priests. So if you're a son of a chief would collect tax, a chief would administer justice, a chief would imprison you, a chief would decide what happens in that village. I still have grandchildren of relatives of mine. So I have many relatives like Bishop Bamunoba, the late Chikuri in Bushenyi. They had a man who was a chief for 40 years. And his last son, who is surviving, told me that in those 40 years, what he did in his Muruka, he was such a more powerful than a permanent secretary today. And he knew everyone who had a granary, he knew who had brewed alcohol, he knew everything. And this person, he's still alive, who's telling me this, he said that he misses those chiefs. But here's the point I'm trying to make. The chiefs and priests were the first people to produce our leaders. Why? Because they had access to education. If you're a son of a chief or priest, you went to school. And if you went to school, you formed our first public service. So I can just give you an example. The late Milton Obote was son of a chief. He was called Ojail Kome as a title in his community. In Ankole, we know that Ibinjira, who became our first minister for justice, was son of a chief. We also know that a fellow called William Rwabwogo, who founded UPC and first president of UPC and UPU, was the son of the first priest in Ankole who was ordained in 1916. It didn't stop there. Even when you came as a refugee and you came from a princely family, like the late Frank Kalimzo, our first head of public service, our first chancellor of Makerere, his father was called Kanyanduga. There had been princes in Rwanda. So when he came, Buganda accepted him because sons of chiefs and priests. I can go on. William Nadiope, Dr. Majugo. These made education, produced our permanent secretaries, our diplomats, our first ministers in government. And so every parent thought that education and success meant someone being in government, someone being a minister. We still see, the Baganda say, Okaliada, Kadada. We still see the denigration of technical skills in education because that's not very important. What is important is your child becoming a member of parliament or something. So that's cluster 1 when I was born. Cluster 2, an army from societies we call acephalous societies. And a acephalous society is not a centralized kingdom. So the British understood very well that if you recruit soldiers from Bunyoro or Buganda, they will fight you because they are centralized around the king. But if you recruit from societies that don't have attachment to kings, although they had rots like Rotawich, who would be named after Kololo, they knew that these would not be as loyal as people from societies that didn't have kings. So they did it in Burma, they had the Gurkhas, they did it in Malawi, they had the Yaos, and they did it in Uganda, and they told the first army officers that a rifle is your means of social ascent. Meaning if you have a gun, you don't go hungry. You marry when you have a gun, so you know what that means. Huh? That is cluster number 2. Cluster number 3 was a small migrant business community of Afro-Asians. They traded in tobacco, in textiles. They were represented in LEGICO, Legislative Council, from 1921 to 62. But they were so small that they generated resentment. Huh? So I don't know if you know this story. The year is 1963. Idi Amin comes to Kampala Club. He's the highest ranking army officer. He wants to have a cold beer. It's 5 in the evening. Huh? Idi Amin was a Muslim, but he would drink. Huh? And so he marches into Kampala Club and he says, I need a beer. And the waiter is an Indian. He said, you are not allowed here. He said, Uganda is independent. I'm head of the army. He said, no, this is only for white people and people of another category. But Idi Amin had served in the King's African Rifles, so he knew something about being a cook and how you talk to people in the kitchen. So he goes behind, he gets his 2 beers from a friendly waiter, and he sits under a tree, and he takes a close aim at the entrance of the club, and he says, your time will come. And so sometimes when you see things happen, you don't know that they are very personal to people, but they are projected across the nation. Eh? I was not surprised when I read this, that Idi Amin would be the one to dream in 1972 that the Indians should go. He had some personal resentment, but he represented, I guess, what was a quiet resentment in the country. The 4th category, I'm sorry I'm taking a long time on this, because when I saw you as professionals, sometimes we're unhinged from our history, and we think we understand our country, but we often don't. And sometimes we need to hear some other voices to let you know that Gachali Mabaga, we need to work hard. Eh? So 1969, when I was born, 96% of our country were peasants, and those 3 classes constituted 4%. And so I want you to imagine, what does 96% peasants mean? A peasant goes to the forest, cuts a tree, makes their own bed. They fall sick, they get some shrubs, they make medicine. Eh? They are not on the market. That's the society I was born into. And I see friends here who know this, who are my age mates. By 1979, when I was in P4, our economy was negative 4% growth. And I remember going to school, we would wash our shirts using pawpaw leaves. And then you go to school the next day. I remember walking 10 kilometers to school. And when I did P7, 1982, our whole area was at war. Young people were disappearing. And all of us who are old as that remember 1980s. Eh? I make it to the university by God's grace. And I thought, now I have 2. But senior 6, I just wanted to go to Makerere. I thought that's the only place you have to go to. If you are 7 in your family and you're the first to get education, then you should really not go to a technical college. Remember? Sons of chiefs and priests, you should really go to Makerere. So I sit exams and I miss Makerere by 1 point. And I refuse to become a teacher. Yet, I think God had imbued in me some teaching skills, but I didn't want to become a teacher, so I sat again. In August, I added a subject, so I make it to Makerere. Hardly had we arrived, there's a strike. And in that strike, I jump over a building in the night. I miss spikes. They're like spikes, a half-complete building with a metallic bars sticking out. At 11 in the night, I break my back, but somehow survive. And 1992, I just teach myself writing because I didn't know anyone in Kampala. I don't know where. So school closes, everyone goes to their uncle. So I teach myself writing, and I'm writing New Vision articles, and the editor calls me and says, "You like writing, we can pay you for what you do." I said, "You mean like leisure writing? I get paid?" They said, "Yes." And I can go on and on. I'm driving at something, and I hope you take this point home, because the topic is failure is a stepping stone to success. I have just described more than 150 years of failure, but I am here, and I want to tell you why. So I get to do an interview for a scholarship in 1994, and we were 50, 5 of us were chosen, and I get to the University of Wales, and my lecturer who comes to speak to us is a diploma holder. And here I am coming for a master's degree. And I have all this chip on my shoulder. I said, "You can't teach me. You can't, because I come from the great Makerere University." And so she says, "Young man, you have a chip on your shoulder." She takes me to her office on a Saturday afternoon. She's got a small room, 2 employees, but she's got the biggest accounts in that city. And she says, "Young man, I did what I liked to do. I liked to do PR and media. And I did it so well that businesses flocked to me to hire me. And your university called me to teach you guys who are full of theory." So that night I understood that a university degree does not give you a job. Doesn't even make you wealthy. So I took a job as a security guard that night. I raised 500 pounds. I registered a business when I came. And I can go on and on. But I have found out something in all this, that happiness is not a right. Many young people these days think that the world owes them a right to be happy, to be successful, and that if I am not happy, nothing works. So I discovered recently that you have a right to happiness just as much as you have a right to use a road, but a road you contribute. Happiness or success means responsibility. To use a road, you pay tax. If you don't pay tax, sometimes we pay taxes and the roads are not good, but we assume that you've made a contribution on that road. And so, what I wanted to share with you today is that there is a bridge between success and failure. And so many of us focus on success, but we approach life in this mindset. And in the morning, I was just trying to find out if I could share this with you. We approach life with these 4 backgrounds. First, we avoid, we don't want to fail. We are fearful of relationships. We don't know how to deal with emotions. We want to severely reduce relationships. And we say to ourselves, I'll be self-sufficient. I will not ask for help. Instead, people should rely on me. I'll be sometimes relentlessly positive, but I'm hiding my vulnerability because I don't want to be hurt again. I meet many young people who deal with life in that way. It's called avoidance. Stay off. I want to succeed. If that's not the case, I also meet the ones who are deprived. It's called deprivation. I was raised by self-centered caregivers or parents. They showed me that, not my parents, I'm just standing in the shoes of those young people. They showed me that my needs really don't matter, and therefore in my old age, I am on my own. If I find something, I deal with it. I can even kill if it will just give me the right feelings. But deep in their hearts, those young people have unworthy feelings. They see flaws in their lives. There is a deeper inner critic who says, I don't fit in unless I become something. So I have found some young people who who get married and their wives leave and they say, I blame myself because I'm pathetic. I'm unworthy. After all, my parents did not show me love. It's called deprivation. The third category is what we call overreactivity. A child is abused or threatened when they were young. They grow up knowing the world is dangerous. They have a high emotional threat detection system. And they interpret ambivalent situations or neutral situations as menacing. And they lash out because they think the world owes them something. The fourth category is passive aggressors. Passive aggression is indirect expression of anger. You're angry against your parents, your friends, your siblings. You sidestep communication. You avoid conflict. You don't know how to deal with negative emotions. But you turn this aggression into some subtle power play. You manipulate others so they feel guilty so that they have a sense of affection towards you. I've seen this with young people. My girlfriend, she wants to go on Saturday. Can I give her permission to go? I'm going to give her permission. When it comes to Friday, he turns around and withdraws and makes the girl feel guilty. And then, no, I can't. You can't go and leave me alone. Then you are going to find other people who will take you. They are very insecure. We do all these things even when we are old. These things I'm describing, you may think, what is Rwabwogo telling us? We are old people. But let me tell you, I have found out, like I said, that Okaliada, Kadada, we are working with these insecurities and we transmit them to the next generation. All this because we are driving to succeed. So let me tell you, there's a bridge to success and it's called failure. So I thank you for listening to me.